The contract arrived on a Thursday, slid under my apartment door at 6 in the morning like it was trying to sneak past my defenses while I was still half asleep and clutching a mug of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. I almost stepped on it. That's the thing nobody tells you about life-altering documents. They don't arrive with fanfare or trumpets or even a polite knock. They arrive quietly printed on crisp white paper with the Meridian Entertainment logo embossed in gold at the top. And they land in the crack between the hallway tile and the kitchen linoleum, and you nearly crush them under your sock-covered heel on the way to the refrigerator. My name is Jaime Riggs, and I am, objectively, the most disorganized omega in the history of the entertainment industry. I picked the contract up, smoothed the crease my foot had made in the corner, and carried it to the kitchen table where it joined the ruins of 3 days' worth of half-finished grocery lists, 2 expired coupons, a guitar pick, and a note I'd written to myself 6 months ago that said, "Buy more milk," in handwriting so chaotic it barely qualified as language. I should have read it then. Every page, every clause, every footnote rendered in font size so small it required either young eyes or a magnifying glass to decipher. I did not do that. I made fresh coffee, called my manager Petra from the couch, listened to her explain at rapid-fire speed that this was the opportunity of a decade, a full-length studio collaboration with Wang Creative, the most prestigious independent music production house in the country, helmed by Bobby Wang himself, the man whose name in the industry carried the same weight as a Grammy nomination. And I said yes before I'd flipped past page 3. Petra had made a sound somewhere between ecstasy and hysteria. I had signed my name in 4 places with a pen that was running out of ink, and I had missed clause 7. Let me back up, because the story doesn't actually start with the contract. It starts 6 weeks earlier in a crowded venue in the arts district called the Cellar, where the ceilings were low and the lighting was amber and warm and the air smelled permanently of old wood and fresh beer and something faintly electric, the way the atmosphere gets just before a very good night of live music. I'd been performing there every other Friday for 2 years. Nothing glamorous, a 30-minute set, an aging microphone stand, and an audience that ranged from genuinely interested to pleasantly drunk, sometimes both at once. I played original songs. Indie folk, if you had to label it, though I'd always resisted the label because it made me sound like I drove a vintage van and owned chickens, which I did not. The van, I mean. I did own a small succulent named Gerald, but that felt categorically different. That particular Friday, I was mid-set, halfway through a song I'd written during a bout of insomnia about the specific loneliness of being the last one awake in a city of millions when I noticed him. He was standing at the back, near the bar, in the kind of clothes that suggested money without announcing it. A dark jacket, charcoal gray, well-fitted in that careful way that looked effortless, but definitely wasn't. His arms were crossed. His expression was difficult to read from the stage through amber light, but his attention was unmistakable. It had a quality to it. Wait, I lost a lyric. Just for a second. Recovered without the audience noticing, I hoped, and finished the song. He was still there when I finished the set, still at the back, still watching. I tried to ignore the way my secondary gender made its opinion known. The warmth that crept up from my sternum wasn't exactly subtle, but I'd had years of practice overriding the more inconvenient instincts of being an omega in proximity to an alpha who smelled even across a smoky room. Like cedar-and-cold-mountain-air, and something that made my hindbrain want to sit down and stay a while. I did not sit down. I went to the bar, ordered water, and occupied myself with the very important task of staring at the bottles on the back shelf. "You went off script on the bridge," a voice said, directly beside me. I turned. He was closer than I expected, which meant the scent hit first, cedar, that cool mountain air quality, a note underneath it that I cataloged immediately and should not have. My presenting had been late, at 22, and people always assumed late-presenting omegas had a better handle on their instincts. They did not. We just had more time to develop excellent coping strategies. "I adapted," I said. "The lyrics in that version were too passive. The emotion called for something more active in the final phrase. He looked at me for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, but the almost predecessor to one, a softening at the edges that made him look startlingly less guarded. "Bobby Wang," he said, and offered his hand. I knew the name. The whole industry knew the name. Wang Creative had launched careers that were now household fixtures. He was an alpha, clearly. The scent alone would have told me that even without every other signal, and he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite categorize, something between professional assessment and personal curiosity. "Jaime Riggs," I said, and shook his hand. His grip was firm. Mine, I hoped, was equally firm. I was intensely aware of the point of contact and equally intensely aware that I was being ridiculous. "I know," he said. "I've been listening to your recordings for 3 weeks." I blinked. "Why?" "Because you're interesting," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "And because the arrangement on your second EP has 3 choices in it that shouldn't work and do, and I wanted to know if that was intentional." "Which 3?" he told me. Specifically, technically, with a precision that told me he hadn't just listened casually. He'd studied the recordings the way I studied the ones I admired most. The ones I returned to again and again, looking for the architecture underneath the feeling. We talked for 40 minutes at that bar. I missed helping break down the sound equipment, which the venue manager gave me a look about. I did not particularly mind. When Bobby left, he left a card on the bar beside my water glass. Just the card. No verbal invitation, no explicit suggestion, just the card. I picked it up. His personal number was handwritten on the back in neat, deliberate script. I put the card in my jacket pocket and took it home and put it on my kitchen table next to the guitar pick and the expired coupons, where it stayed for 9 days while I convinced myself I wasn't going to call. On the 10th day, I called. The conversation was professional. Entirely, almost studiedly professional. He explained the concept, a solo album, fully produced at Wang Creative, a co-writing arrangement that would be collaborative from the ground up rather than him retrofitting his vision onto my work. He wanted the sound to be mine, but amplified, refined. He used the word elevated, and I bristled slightly because that word always implied that the original wasn't already good enough, and he must have caught the flicker of it in my tone because he paused and said, "I don't mean corrected, I mean resonated, the way a speaker resonates the frequency that was already there." I was quiet for a moment. "That's a better metaphor," I said. "I have a lot of them," he said. Occupational requirement. The contract arrived 6 days after that call. I signed it without reading Clause 7. Wang Creative occupied the 3rd and 4th floors of a converted industrial building on the west side of the city. The exterior was all old, brick and steel-framed windows. The interior was something else, entirely. Clean lines, acoustic paneling and warm tones, hallways that absorbed sound so completely you felt slightly sealed off from the world the moment the elevator doors closed. My first morning, I arrived 12 minutes early, which for me was essentially a personal record. The receptionist, a sharp-eyed beta named Clem, who I would later discover knew the exact location of everything in the building, including things that had been lost for years, gave me a badge and pointed me towards Studio C on the 4th floor. Studio C was larger than any space I'd ever recorded in. The control room had a mixing board that looked like it could navigate a spacecraft. Through the glass, the live room glowed with the particular hush of a professionally treated space, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, that felt held. Bobby was already there. He was at the mixing board, headphones around his neck, reviewing something on a monitor. He was wearing a simpler version of the dark jacket from the Cellar, a different one, charcoal again, sleeves pushed to the elbows. His hair was dark and slightly overgrown at the collar, and there was a second coffee cup on the console beside his own that had not been there when he arrived. "That's yours," he said, without looking up. "Black, 2 sugars," Clem told me. I sat down beside him, picked up the coffee, tried not to notice that it was exactly right. "We're starting with the bones today," he said. "Before we touch a single instrument or lay down a single track, I want to understand what this album is actually about." I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Musically, emotionally, he finally looked at me. Every album worth making is about something the artist is working out. Not necessarily consciously, the music is the working out. What are you working out? It was an extraordinarily direct question for 8:45 in the morning. Being seen, I said after a pause long enough that I genuinely considered giving a safer answer. Or, not being seen. The gap between what I put into the music and whether the person on the other side of it actually receives it, whether connection is even possible, or whether we're all just broadcasting into voids and occasionally the signals overlap by accident. Bobby was quiet, listening in that particular way he had, where his full attention was a palpable thing. That, he said finally, is an album. We started talking. The coffee went cold again. Neither of us noticed for a long time. The first 2 weeks were structured and professional and so carefully, deliberately appropriate that I started to wonder if the warmth at the Cellar had been a one-sided thing on my part. Bobby was collaborative, meticulous, brilliant in the practical sense of the word. The kind of intelligent that made problems rearrange themselves into solutions in real time. He heard things in my rough sketches that I hadn't consciously put there and could articulate them back to me with such precision that I felt, repeatedly, the slightly vertiginous experience of being understood more clearly than I understood myself. But he maintained a professional distance that was very consistent and very deliberately maintained. I told myself this was appropriate and correct and probably for the best. I was in his studio. He was my producer. The power differential was real, even if it didn't feel like a traditional hierarchy. He held the resources, the platform, the reach. Getting emotionally entangled would be the kind of complication that derailed careers, and I had a career to not derail. I told myself this every morning on the train to the studio. I told myself this every evening on the train back home. I think it's fair to say, not entirely convincing myself. The thing was, and this is the thing nobody warns you about, working in close creative proximity with someone whose mind operates on a frequency that harmonizes with yours in ways that feel almost physically real. The work itself was intimacy. Not the romantic kind, or not only that kind. The kind where you hand someone a half-finished thought and they complete it, not the way you would have, but better, in a direction you'd been circling without being able to land. The kind where disagreement becomes interesting rather than threatening because the other person's resistance has the quality of engagement rather than rejection. By the end of the second week, I knew which chair he preferred in the control room and why. Bad angle from the left due to an old shoulder injury he never mentioned directly, but that I'd noticed in how he moved. I knew he drank his coffee hot until it was gone, didn't believe in letting it go cold the way I did, which meant he got up and refreshed it twice to my none. I knew he had an opinion about synthesizer use that bordered on philosophical conviction and could be redirected, but never entirely overridden. I knew the way his hands moved over the mixing board, precise, deliberate, with an attention that bordered on reverence. I knew the sound he made when something in the arrangement clicked into place, a very quiet exhale, barely audible, not quite a sigh. The opposite of frustration. Relief, almost. Satisfaction. I was in serious trouble. It was Clem who brought Clause 7 to my attention. Week 3, a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the lounge on the 4th floor heating up leftovers in the microwave and scrolling through nothing on my phone when Clem appeared in the doorway with the specific expression of someone who is about to say something that is going to require significant processing time. "Riggs," Clem said, "did you read the full contract before you signed?" "Of course," I said, which was technically true in the sense that I had read some of it. Clem's expression did not shift. "Clause 7, Clem said. The microwave beeped. I ignored it. "What's in Clause 7? Clem handed me a printed page, a copy of the relevant section, which Clem had apparently taken upon themselves to produce for this exact moment. I read it. I read it again. My leftovers cooled to room temperature while the meaning of the language arranged and rearranged itself in my understanding. Clause 7 of the Wang Creative Standard Collaboration Agreement contained what the contract referred to as a proximity provision. A clause originally designed, Clem explained with the measured tone of someone who'd explained this before, to prevent secondary gender-related complications from affecting collaborative projects of significant investment. It required, in cases of an alpha-omega pairing in a professional creative collaboration lasting more than 60 days, that both parties present medical documentation of suppressant compliance at the 30-day mark and participate in a single formal session with the company's scent-compatibility consultant, Dr. Braid. Asha Novak, who would assess and, if necessary, mediate any secondary gender dynamics that might affect the working relationship. It was, in the world of the contract, a protection clause, a professional safeguard. It was also the most embarrassing document I had ever been indirectly presented with, because the existence of Clause 7 implied that someone, at some point, had needed Clause 7. "Bobby has to do this too?" I asked. "It's mutual," Clem confirmed. "It's coming up at the 30-day mark, next Friday." I put the printed page face down on the counter. "Fantastic," I said. "I didn't bring it up with Bobby that afternoon, or Thursday. I arrived Friday morning with the full intention of being an adult about a perfectly standard contractual requirement and spent approximately 40 minutes successfully pretending the appointment didn't exist while we worked on the bridge section of the third track. Bobby brought it up first. "Dr. Novak," he said, between playback runs, not looking up from his notes. "This afternoon at 4. "Right," I said. "It's a standard assessment. Shouldn't take more than an hour." "Right," I said again. He did look up then, met my eyes across the console. His expression was, as usual, difficult to read from the outside, but something in it made me feel like he was reading me considerably more easily than I was reading him. "Jaime," he said. It was the first time he'd used my first name without a professional lead-in. The single syllable hit differently than I expected. "It's fine," I said. "It's standard. Perfectly normal professional protocol." "Agreed," he said, and went back to his notes. I stared at the waveform on the monitor for the next several minutes and thought about literally nothing except the scent of cedar-and-cold-mountain-air and how thoroughly I was in over my head. Dr. Terpra, Asha Novak's office, was on the building's third floor, tucked between the archive rooms and a small recording library. It smelled carefully of nothing, scent neutral in the deliberately constructed way that professional mediator spaces always were, a neutrality that required active maintenance and communicated, in its absence, a very specific kind of professional care. Dr. Novak was a sharp-featured beta woman in her 50s with reading glasses she wore on a chain, and a manner that was simultaneously warm and utterly no-nonsense, the combination of which I found both reassuring and terrifying. Bobby and I sat in the two chairs across from her desk. There was a careful 6 inches of air between us that I was suddenly very aware of. "I've reviewed both your medical compliance forms, Dr. Doc," Novak said, setting the papers down. "Everything is current, everything is in order. That's the clinical portion addressed." She folded her hands. "Now for the actual conversation." She looked at us both, alternating, with the calm patience of someone who had seen every possible variation of this situation and was not surprised by any of them. "This provision isn't punitive," she said. "It exists because creative partnerships operate in close proximity over extended time, and suppressed biology doesn't mean absent biology. The research on alpha-omega creative pairs consistently shows that awareness and communication are more effective management tools than suppression and avoidance." She paused. "With that said, how is the working relationship?" "Excellent," Bobby said. At the same moment I said, "Good." Dr. Novak's mouth curved slightly. "Those are different answers." A beat of silence. "The work is going very well," Bobby said, tone measured. "The collaboration is productive." "Jaime?" Dr. Novak looked at me. I was acutely aware of the 6 inches of air between us. "Professionally, it's the best creative partnership I've been in," I said carefully. "Bobby is an exceptional producer. The work it's genuinely exciting. I look forward to it. And personally, there was a long pause in which the scent-neutral room felt very small. We're professional, I said. Dr. Novak nodded, wrote something small on her notepad. Bobby? I agree with that characterization, he said. She wrote something else. Then she looked up and addressed us both with an equanimity that suggested she was about to say something that landed like a stone in still water. I want to be direct with both of you. The suppressant compliance is noted, and that's not my concern. My concern, professionally, is when two people are very carefully managing something that has already shifted beyond professional territory in ways that they are choosing not to acknowledge. Because unacknowledged dynamics have a way of affecting the work, even when, especially when, both parties are highly intelligent and highly invested in not letting that happen. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence, the kind that has weight. I'm not saying that's what's happening here, Dr. Novak continued pleasantly. I'm saying it's something to be aware of. My recommendation is simply this: open communication. If something is affecting the working environment, say so. To each other, not just to me. The contract protects you both. The work benefits when the people doing it aren't expending significant energy on management. She closed her notepad. Questions? I had several. I asked none of them. Bobby said, "No, thank you, Dr. Novak." We walked back to the elevator in silence. Got in. The doors closed. The floor numbers changed. She's thorough, I said, to the elevator doors. She is, Bobby said, to the same elevator doors. The doors opened on the 4th floor. We went back to Studio C. We worked for another 3 hours on the bridge section, and it was by some margin the most charged 3 hours of professional recording I had ever experienced. Every exchange of ideas vibrating slightly with the thing neither of us had said in Dr. Novak's office, or in the elevator, or anywhere else. At 7, Bobby said, "I'll see you Monday," and I said Monday, and I went home on the train and sat in my apartment looking at Gerald the succulent for a long time without really seeing it. The weekend was long. I cleaned the apartment, which I hadn't done thoroughly in 6 weeks. I found the guitar pick on the kitchen table and put it in a drawer. I made a grocery list and actually went to the grocery store. I called my friend Sable, who was a beta and had known me since we were teenagers, and had the particular skill of listening to everything I didn't say as clearly as everything I did. I told her about the project. I told her about the studio. I told her, carefully and in measured terms, about Bobby. Sable listened to all of it and then said, "You're describing someone you're in love with." "I've known him for a month," I said. "That's not a rebuttal," she said. I looked at Gerald. Gerald had the good grace not to offer an opinion. "It's complicated," I said. "Most things worth anything are complicated," Sable said. "What does he smell like?" Sable. "It's relevant information." "Cedar," I said, before I could stop myself, "and something cold, like air before it snows." She made a sound that conveyed, without words, that she considered the matter settled. "It's not settled," I told her. "Tell him," she said, "or don't. But stop pretending you don't know what's happening." After we hung up, I sat on my couch for a while. Then I picked up the guitar. The acoustic, the one I kept in the living room, the one I played when I was processing rather than composing, and played nothing in particular for half an hour. My fingers finding shapes on the fretboard that weren't songs yet, that were the preliminary language of something trying to become one. Monday arrived with the particular quality of mornings after weekends spent in too much of your own head. Slightly too bright, slightly too immediate, the world reasserting itself before you finished adjusting. I arrived at the studio at exactly 9. Not early this time. Bobby was already there. He was in the live room rather than the control room, which was unusual. Standing at the piano in the corner, picking out something slow and sparse with one hand, not quite a melody, something exploratory. He had his back to the glass. He didn't hear me come in. I stood in the control room and watched through the glass for a moment. There's something about observing someone in the act of searching for something musically, before the thing is found, in the reaching toward stage, that feels like witnessing a private thing. Not voyeuristic. Intimate in the truest sense, the sense that has nothing to do with proximity and everything to do with access. He found a phrase, played it again. changed the last note, played it a third time with both hands now, and it opened into something, not a full idea yet, but the shape of one, the emotional territory without the map. I went into the live room. He heard the door and turned, and for a fraction of a second before his expression settled back into its professional configuration, I saw something that was not professional at all. Something quick and unguarded that he then carefully arranged into a more familiar neutrality. "Morning," he said. "What was that?" I asked, nodding toward the piano. A brief pause. "Nothing yet." It was something. He turned back to the piano. Not dismissively, more like he was looking at it instead of looking at me while he thought about how to answer. "You said the album is about the gap between transmission and reception," he said. "Between what you put out and whether it's actually received. I was thinking about the other side of that." "The receiving side?" "The withholding side." He played the phrase again, quietly. "What it sounds like when someone has a signal and doesn't send it." I was standing about 4 feet from the piano bench. The live room was warm. The acoustic treatment made the space feel close and held. "Why do people withhold?" I asked. "Because sending a signal is a form of vulnerability," he said. "And vulnerability requires, trust isn't quite the right word. It requires certainty that the signal won't be used against you." The phrase he'd been playing ended on an unresolved note. He left it unresolved. "Bobby," I said. He looked up from the keys. Doctor. "Novak said we should communicate," I said, "if something is affecting the working environment." He was very still. "Is something affecting the working environment?" he said, carefully. "Yes," I said. "And I think we both know what it is. And I think we've both been very professionally managing it. And I think the professional management is starting to cost more than it saves." Which is probably what she was trying to tell us. A long moment. The kind that contains an entire decision. "Jamie," he said. "My name, again, the single syllable with all its particular weight. I am your producer. You're here on a contract I offered. That creates an obligation on my end to make sure this space is safe and not. I can't use my position to—" "You're not," I said. "I'm telling you something." "You're not asking." He was quiet. His hands were in his lap now, not on the keys. "I've been aware of you," he said after a moment, "since the first night at the Cellar." That's not a professional statement. It's not scent instinct, or not only that, I've been attracted to people by instinct before, and it's uncomplicated, and it fades. This is not that. He stopped, started again. "The way you think about music, the way you defended a lyric change to a stranger at a bar at midnight without any defensiveness, just complete certainty and a willingness to articulate the certainty. The way you listen. The way you push back on arrangements you don't believe in, and then, when I give you a reason that actually holds, you reconsider without ego." He paused. "I've been spending 4 weeks being very carefully appropriate." "I know," I said. "I've been watching you be appropriate." Something shifted in his expression. Not the almost smile from the Cellar. Something more open than that. More unguarded. "What are you doing right now?" I asked. "Being appropriate?" "Trying to," he said. "Could you try a little less?" He stood up from the piano bench. He was taller than me by a few inches, and the distance between us was now 2 feet and then less, as he crossed it in a way that was deliberate and unhurried, giving me every opportunity to establish a different kind of boundary, which I did not. When he was close enough that the cedar and cold air scent was immediate rather than ambient, he stopped. "Jamie," he said, for the third time, and this time it didn't have any professional configuration around it at all. "Bobby," I said back, equally stripped of management. He reached up and touched my jaw with the back of his fingers. One side, just that. Just the backs of 2 fingers against my cheekbone, in a contact so careful it barely qualified as touch. And yet the warmth of it moved through me in a way that entirely disproportionate gestures couldn't have managed. "The album first," he said. "The album first," I agreed. He lowered his hand, stepped back the 2 feet. We looked at each other for a moment, in the warm, acoustic-treated air of the live room, and something in the quality of the space between us had changed in a way that was irreversible, which should have been terrifying, and was instead the exact opposite of terrifying. something like the particular relief of a signal finally sent and received. "Shall we work?" he said. "We shall," I said. We worked, and the work that day had a quality it hadn't had before. Not better technically, but more open somehow, the two of us moving through the music with less of our energy redirected toward the careful maintenance of appropriate distance. The bridge we'd been wrestling with for 2 weeks resolved in an hour and a half. At the end of the session, Bobby held the door of Studio C open for me. "Dinner?" he said. "Not a working dinner. Just dinner." "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes." The restaurant was small and unhurried, the kind of place with paper tablecloths and candles wedged into wine bottles and a menu written on a chalkboard that changed weekly. Not impressive in the performative way that some restaurants were impressive. Comfortable in the way that required more care to achieve than impressive did. We sat across from each other and ordered without looking at the menu for very long, and for the first 20 minutes we talked about music, because that was the gravity between us, and it was useless to pretend otherwise. And then we drifted, almost without noticing the drift, into something else. He told me about growing up musical in a family that was not particularly musical. A father who worked in construction, a mother who was a bookkeeper, neither of them dismissive of his interest, but neither of them with any framework for what it looked like to build a life out of sound. He'd found his way to it through stubbornness and the specific determination of someone who has identified, very young, the thing they cannot be without. "Were you ever afraid it wouldn't work?" I asked. "Every day for the first 5 years," he said. "And then it started working, and I was afraid it would stop." "Does that go away?" He looked at me across the candlelight. "No. It just becomes a more familiar companion." I turned my wine glass in my hands. My presenting was late, 22. Most of my friends had presented at 16, 17, and I used to think there was something wrong with me, like I was running behind some schedule I hadn't been informed of. And then when it happened, it was a lot. Not bad, just a lot. Like a whole language I had to learn very fast. Did it change how people treated you professionally? Yes and no. The industry has gotten better. But there are still rooms where being an omega means being assumed to be less in some way, less objective, less professional, more easily swayed by instinct. I've spent a lot of energy being visible in a way that pushes against that assumption. I paused. The contract provision, for instance. "Clause 7, he said. "Clause 7, I confirmed. "I know why it exists. I know it's meant as protection. But the framing assumes that an omega in a collaborative situation with an alpha is a variable that needs to be managed." Bobby was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. "And I want you to know that that's not how I think about it. This," he gestured between us, "is not a management situation. You're not a variable." "I know," I said. And I did know. Knowing and hearing it said were, however, different things. "When I'm in the studio with you," he said, "your instincts they're part of how you hear things. The way you pick up on emotional register in an arrangement before the technical analysis catches up, that's not a liability, it's a form of precision." He held my gaze. "I hired you because you're exceptionally talented. I'm having dinner with you because you're someone I find genuinely extraordinary. Those aren't the same statement, but they're not in conflict either." The candlelight moved. Someone at the table beside us laughed at something, the sound soft and brief in the warm air. "This is going to be complicated," I said. "Almost certainly," he agreed. "We work together. The album is, what, 3 more months?" "Roughly. And after the album?" He looked at me steadily. "After the album, we figure out what we are. During the album, we figure out what we can be." "That's very measured," I said. "I'd been accused of that," he said. "I can be patient," I said. His mouth curved. The almost smile from the cellar. The one I'd thought about afterward. The one that had graduated tonight into something more fully itself. "I know," he said. "You're patient about everything except lyric revisions." I laughed. It surprised me. The ease of it. The way it came up fully and without self-consciousness. His smile widened in response. And that too surprised me. The way his face changed when he let it, the careful guard lowering into something warmer and entirely different. We stayed until the restaurant started quietly stacking chairs at the neighboring tables. We walked for a while after, no particular direction, the city at night doing the city at night thing of seeming both populous and private, all those lit windows and tall buildings and all those people sealed inside their own stories. At the point where our walking routes diverged, we stopped. "This is where I go left," he said. "And I go right," I said. "A moment." He leaned in and pressed his lips briefly to my temple. Not my cheek, my temple. A gesture that managed to be both restrained and extraordinarily tender in its specificity. The cedar scent was immediate, and my omega instincts said several things at once, all of which I set firmly aside for consideration later. "Sleep well, Jamie," he said. "You too," I said. He went left. I went right. I walked 4 blocks on an unfamiliar street before realizing I'd gone the wrong direction entirely and had to double back, and I couldn't bring myself to be annoyed about it. The weeks that followed had a quality I didn't have a precise word for. Not easy. Easy. Would have required the kind of certainty we hadn't yet earned. Not tense. The tension had transformed into something more dynamic, more charged with potential energy than unresolved anxiety. Something like suspended. Like a chord held just before resolution, the kind that hums with everything it's about to become. We were careful with each other in the studio. And the carefulness wasn't the managed professional distance of before, but something more willing. The careful attention of people who have acknowledged they matter to each other and are choosing to prioritize the work, because the work itself is a form of the feeling. He had a habit of leaving coffee on the console for me in the mornings. Always right temperature, always exactly how I liked it. I started leaving a second pastry on his side of the board on Tuesdays, because I'd noticed he didn't eat enough in the morning and was consistently more irritable by 11 on the days he skipped breakfast. Which was most days. He noticed the pastry the second Tuesday and looked at me with an expression that was trying to be neutral and achieving something closer to transparent. "Clem didn't get this," he said. "No," I agreed, and returned to the arrangement we were reviewing. He ate the pastry. He was notably less irritable by 11. We worked through 7 tracks. The album was taking shape in a way that felt organic rather than constructed. Each song finding its place in the sequence with the logic of something growing rather than something built. There was a thread through it, the album about the gap between transmission and reception that had become, in the making, also about what happens when the gap narrows, when the signal gets through. I noticed this more than I said. He noticed it too. I was reasonably sure of that. There were evenings when the session ran long and the city outside the 4th floor windows went dark. When the quality of the room would shift, when the music playing back through the studio monitors would be something I'd written about, something I'd felt. And Bobby would be listening with his full attention in that particular way of his, and the feeling in the room would be too large for the professional container we'd agreed to keep it in. And we would both notice and both continue anyway, because the album mattered, and we'd agreed, and we were both people who honored what they'd agreed to. But there were also moments. There was the afternoon he leaned across me to reach the console, and his hand covered mine briefly on the fader, both of us adjusting the same level at the same moment. And neither of us moved for a full beat too long before he said, "Bring it up 2 more," in a voice that was slightly lower than usual. There was the Wednesday we spent 4 hours getting a vocal take, right because something in my delivery was off and I couldn't locate why. And finally, Bobby came into the live room and stood beside me at the microphone and said very quietly, "Stop trying to perform the feeling, you have the feeling. Just let the feeling through," and he touched the back of my shoulder barely. And the next take was perfect, and I stood in the warm live room with my eyes closed for a moment afterward, because the convergence of what he'd said and what the song was about had hit me somewhere that wasn't entirely professional. There was the evening he played me the instrumental he'd been building for the album's penultimate track, the one based on the searching piano phrase I'd watched him find on that Monday morning, and when it finished, I was quiet for a long moment, and he was watching me with the kind of attention that is also waiting, and I said, "This is the other side of the signal," and he said yes, and the word had several layers, and we both knew it. One Thursday, Clem knocked on the Studio C door with a look of mild, self-satisfied importance and delivered a printed document, the 30-day provision follow-up form from Dr. Novak, which both parties were required to complete and return, confirming continued awareness and communication. Bobby and I both looked at the form, then at each other. "Are we communicating?" I asked. "More than before," he said. "And are we aware?" "A beat." "Painfully," he said. I signed the form. He signed the form. We sent it back with Clem, who left with the expression of someone extremely enjoying this entirely as a professional observer. "Clem knows," I said. "Clem has known since week 2, Bobby said. "Clem knows everything. It's their primary function." The 8th track broke something open. It was a song I'd brought in as a rough demo, 3.5 minutes, piano and vocal only, no arrangement yet. I'd written it in the middle of the night between weeks 4 and 5, the kind of song that arrives mostly finished and doesn't require much navigation because it knows where it's going before you do. I called it Clause in the working file, which Bobby had not asked about and I had not explained. He listened to the demo in the control room with his hands in his lap and his face in that particular, still, total attention configuration. When it finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then, "Who is this about?" I looked at the monitor. "Someone I work with." "Another beat. The lyric in the second verse," he said. "The one about the piano phrase, the one that reaches and doesn't resolve." "Yes." "When did you write that?" "Week 5. That Monday morning. You didn't know I was watching you through the glass." He turned to look at me. The expression on his face was the most fully open I had seen it. Not the almost smile, or the professional calm, or even the warmth from the restaurant over candlelight, but something underneath all of those. Something that had been behind the careful management this whole time, present and waiting. "Jamie," he said. "I know," I said. "Album first." He was quiet for a moment. The playback monitors were silent. The room held the particular hush of a held note. "How many weeks left?" he said. 6, roughly, maybe 7. He nodded slowly. 6 weeks, he said. It was not agreement, it was calculation. "Can we put this one on the album?" I asked. He looked at the monitor, at the waveform of my demo, at the shape of those 3.5 minutes. "It needs strings," he said. "And I want to discuss the bridge, because there's a harmonic choice in bar 22 that I think you made on instinct that we should examine consciously. But it goes on the album." He turned back to me. The expression had settled back toward neutral, but it wasn't the same neutral as before. It was thinner now, the guard turned down rather than fully deployed. "It goes on the album," he confirmed. "We worked on it for 2 sessions. On the 3rd session, when we brought in the session musicians for the string arrangement, I watched Bobby direct the quartet through what he wanted with such precise, specific language. Not just technical instruction, but communicative. The way he named the emotional territory he needed the notes to occupy, and thought not for the first time, and now without the impulse to suppress the thought. This person. Of all the people I might have built something with, this person, Petra called in the middle of week 7 to talk press strategy for the album, which had at that point been titled. In a move we'd both arrived at simultaneously from different directions, and then looked at each other about for a moment in the control room, transmission. She wanted to know about the collaboration process for the press materials. I told her it had been extraordinary. She asked if there was a story there. Editors always wanted a story. "I signed a contract without reading it fully," I said. "There's probably a story somewhere in that." "That's a terrible story," Petra said. "What else?" After the call, I sat at the kitchen table. My kitchen table at home, the one that was cleaner now than it had been in months, the guitar pick in its drawer. The expired coupons finally in the recycling, and thought about stories, about the one I was in the middle of, about how you couldn't see the shape of a story while you were inside it, only after, when you had the distance to look back and see the arc. Week 8, Bobby suggested dinner again. Not a working dinner. We went back to the same restaurant with the paper tablecloths, which I discovered was called Esme's, and had been open for 17 years, and was run by a family that treated regulars with the particular warmth of people who understand that a restaurant is a place people return to because something there feels like it belongs to them. The host recognized Bobby. Recognized, by the visit's end, me as well. Over dinner he told me about his worst project, a collaboration in his early career with an artist whose vision and execution were entirely misaligned, where every session was an exercise in navigating the gap between what the artist wanted to feel they were making and what they were actually making, and how he'd tried to bridge that gap for 8 months before the project collapsed under the weight of its own contradiction. "What did you learn from it?" I asked. "That you can't produce someone into believing something about their own work," he said. "Especially something true. The belief has to already be there, or the music doesn't go anywhere real." "Do you believe in my work?" I asked. "I believed in it before I called you," he said. "I wouldn't have called you otherwise. Is that always how you work? Call the artist you already believe in?" "No," he said. "Usually there's a more analytical process. Listening, assessment, commercial consideration. With you it was—" He stopped. "Instinct?" I offered. He looked at me steadily, something more specific than that. We held the eye contact a moment, something passing between us, wordless, in the vocabulary of the last 2 months. "2 more weeks," he said. "Give or take," I agreed. He poured wine, handed me my glass. His fingers were careful to avoid mine, which I noticed, which he noticed me noticing. "I find," he said, setting down his glass, "that the anticipation is considerable." I laughed, slightly surprised, because it was the most direct thing he'd said in weeks, delivered in a tone of perfect understatement, and the combination was entirely disarming. "Considerable," I repeated. "Significant," he amended, and his mouth was doing the thing where the almost smile was present and fully earned. "Vast," I offered. "That's accurate," he agreed, and clinked his glass against mine. The final session was a Tuesday. We spent the morning on mastering notes, the afternoon in a long review of the full sequence, 12 tracks played through in order, the way a listener would encounter them for the first time. Sitting in the control room in the amber-warm light of the studio monitors, hearing the album as a whole. It was, without vanity or false modesty, very good. The kind of good that had its own internal logic, its own weather, the kind you could return to and find new rooms in. When the last note of the last track faded, we sat in silence for a moment. "That's it," I said. "That's the album," he agreed. The word felt large. 12 tracks. 3 months. Everything that had happened in this room, and in the rooms adjacent to it, including the rooms inside both of us that we'd been navigating carefully toward each other this whole time. Bobby reached over and stopped the playback. Then he turned in his chair, fully facing me, which he didn't often do directly. He usually faced the console, or the monitor, or the glass, communicating in partial profile. Facing me directly was a choice. "The contract," he said. "Yes," I said. "The collaboration has concluded, technically." He held my gaze. "Which means the provisions governing the working relationship and any documentation thereof are—" "Bobby," I said. "Concluded," he said. "I know. I've wanted to say certain things for approximately 10 weeks, he said, in the same measured tone he used to talk about harmonic theory, which I found both deeply funny and deeply endearing. I've been noting them in a document, mentally, as they occurred, for later reference." "A document," I said. "An informal document. More of a list. How long is the list?" He considered. "Significant," he said. I turned to face him fully as he was facing me. 2 people in 2 chairs in a quiet studio, the album finished behind us on the playback system, the city beyond the windows doing its late afternoon thing. "Start somewhere on the list," I said. He was quiet for a beat. "Then, the night of your first demo playback. You were explaining the emotional architecture of the opening track, and you used your hands. You do that when you're passionate about something, these small, precise gestures that trace the shape of what you're describing in the air. And I was supposed to be listening to the arrangement, and I was watching your hands and thinking that I had never wanted to be someone's idea of home before with that particular urgency, that it was new, that urgency. I sat with that for a moment. My turn? I asked. If you want. The Monday morning with the piano. Before you knew I was there, watching you look for something you hadn't found yet. The reaching. I thought that's what it looks like when someone cares about the thing they're doing with their whole self, not just their professional self, all of it. And I wanted to know that version of you. Not just the producer. All of it. His hands, which had been in his lap, moved, one crossing the 6 inches of air between our chairs and resting on mine. The same contact as in the live room, weeks ago, but deliberate now, acknowledged. I think, he said, I've known you for 3 months and have the sensation of having known you for significantly longer. The frequency thing, I said. When someone operates on yours. Yes. His thumb moved slightly against the back of my hand. Jaime. Bobby, I said, full and direct, no management around the edges. He leaned forward and kissed me, and it was, like everything else he did, entirely deliberate. A choice made with complete attention, unhurried, the same quality of care he brought to an arrangement that mattered. One hand came up to my jaw, and the familiarity of the gesture and the newness of it existing simultaneously produced something in me that was almost its own key change. A harmonic shift into a territory that was warmer and more resolved than anything before it. When it ended, and it ended softly, with the kind of reluctance that implies intent to return. We stayed close, his forehead tipping briefly to mine. The list, I said, against the small distance between us. Does this appear on it? This is the list's organizing principle, he said. I laughed. He felt it against his cheek. I was near enough that he could, and his expression did the thing, the full version. The smile I'd been cataloging variations of for 3 months finally arrived in its complete form, and it rearranged his face in a way that made it look like this was what it was meant to be doing all along. The album, I said, we should probably. Clem will finalize the submission package, he said. That's Clem's function, among others. Are you suggesting we leave early? The work is finished, he said. What happens after the album is ours to figure out. I believe we determined that at dinner several weeks ago. So we're figuring it out. He took my hand, fully, not the back of his fingers' careful contact, but his whole hand around mine, easy and warm. We're figuring it out, he confirmed. 3 months after the album released, Transmission had a review in a music publication that described it as the rare thing, a work that sounds like someone being found. I read the review at my kitchen table, which was clean now in a sustainable way, rather than the crisis cleaning way of before, and sent the link to Bobby with no message attached. He sent back, accurate. And then, Ace dinner tonight? Ace. I looked at Gerald. Gerald had been repotted since the winter and was thriving in a way that felt vaguely symbolic. I wrote back, Esme's? He wrote back, A7. I'll get there first and get the table. S. I put my phone down and leaned back in my chair and let the morning be what it was. Ordinary and particular and quiet in the way that contains everything good. The album had come out to more attention than I'd had before, which was both wonderful and occasionally exhausting in the way that attention always is when it arrives in volume. Performances, press, the logistical machinery of a release. Bobby had been at the edge of all of it, not in it with me in a way that complicated the professional reception because he was careful about that distinction, the same carefulness that characterized everything he did, but present, a message before a big interview. Sitting in the back at the first headlining show, arms crossed, and I'd found him during the second song and played the rest of the set to the room and also specifically to him. The way I'd learned to split my attention, and after he'd said, third track bar 6, you changed the dynamic, and I'd said, it felt right in the room, and he'd said, it was, with a certainty that landed somewhere specific. We had figured out what we were during the album. We were figuring out what we were after it. It was not, as I had predicted, uncomplicated. The industry being what it was, a producer and an Omega artist in a relationship required navigation. The perception problem, the assumption that the relationship explained the work rather than the other way around. We talked about it. more than once, at length, with the same quality of engagement that characterized the music, neither of us avoiding the hard center of an issue, both of us willing to be changed by the other's perspective. He was not, I discovered, a person who made things easy. He was a person who made things worth it, which is categorically different and more valuable. He challenged my arrangements, my lyric choices, my interpretations of my own emotional history as it showed up in songs. He was not always right. He was almost always engaged, which was better than right. I was not, he discovered, a person who accepted a premise without interrogating it, which he told me was simultaneously the quality he found most challenging and most indispensable. I pushed back on production choices, on sequencing decisions, on the assumptions embedded in industry practices he'd been operating in long enough that they'd become invisible to him. He told me once that I'd changed how he heard an entire category of production choice he'd made unthinkingly for 15 years, and he said it with the particular quality of someone offering something real. Not a compliment, but an account. Clause 7's final requirement was a 60-day follow-up session with Dr. Novak, which occurred after the album was complete and after the contract had technically concluded, because the provision covered the collaboration period plus 60 days. Dr. 2. Novak sat across from us in her scent-neutral office and looked at us with the expression of a person who has seen exactly this outcome before and was not remotely surprised by it. Communication? She said. Ongoing, Bobby said. Awareness? She said. I looked at him. He looked back. Comprehensive, I said. Dr. Novak made a note, removed her reading glasses from their chain, and settled them on her face. Then she looked up with something in her expression that was warm in a very restrained, professional way. My work here, she said, appears to be concluded. The second album started as a conversation at Esme's on a night in early spring, when the city outside was doing the tentative new season thing and the paper tablecloths were the same as always and the candles in the wine bottles were lit. Bobby was across from me with his coffee, still hot. He'd just gotten a refill, and I had a notebook open on the table because I'd had an idea on the train and written it down and then gotten absorbed and filled half a page before remembering I was supposed to be having dinner. Show me, he said, nodding at the notebook. I turned it toward him. The handwriting was chaotic, which he'd long since decoded. He read it carefully, the way he read everything I gave him. Then he sat back and looked at the wine bottle candle flame for a moment with the still, considering expression that meant his mind was doing something. This is about the period after, he said. After what? After the signal reaches, he said. After the gap closes. What happens in the space where there used to be the reaching? I looked at what I'd written. He was right. He was usually right about what I was writing about before I'd fully articulated it to myself, which was still, 8 months in, slightly vertiginous. Is that an album? I asked. He reached across the paper tablecloth and covered my hand with his. That's an album, he said. I turned my hand over, palm up, fingers around his. Outside, the spring city went about its business. Inside Esme's, we stayed until the chairs came out. Epilogue, a note on contracts. I have since read every contract in full, including all subclauses, footnotes, and provisions rendered in small font. I have a system now, highlighter, sticky tabs, a cup of coffee that I actually let get cold because some things about me have remained consistent. I have also, on more than one occasion, been grateful for Clause 7. Not because it forced anything, it didn't. No contractual provision can make two people turn toward each other. That requires something else. The particular combination of availability and recognition. The moment when a signal and a receiver happen to occupy the same space and one of them is brave enough to transmit. Clause 7 created a room in which Dr. Novak said, "Communicate, be aware, don't let the unspoken become the loudest thing in the room." And we, two people who were both privately excellent at letting things remain unspoken, had to at least acknowledge the doorway. The rest was ours. The first album is Transmission. The second album is called Received. Nos. Bobby produced it. He will tell you, if you ask him about the process, that it was the easiest album he has ever made. He will tell you that the artist knew exactly what she wanted and had the precise vocabulary to describe it and the conviction to defend it. He will tell you that some collaborations find their frequency and stay there. He will not, being Bobby, say the more personal thing. That's not his register in public. But in the studio late, when the session musicians have gone home and it's just us in Studio C, he'll play back a vocal take and sit in the control room with his hands in his lap and his face in that particular configuration. And after the last note fades, he'll look at me through the glass with an expression that has no professional configuration around it whatsoever. And that, which no contract clause contains or could contain, is the part that matters most. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe. Comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, make sure to join our Patreon. Link is in the description. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.